With the latest CPI numbers being released this week, the Biden administration continues to struggle with inflation, which continues to plague us, the American people. The inflation has continued to rise the entire life of his presidency since January of 2021. But the Biden administration is reluctant to do the things necessary and accept the blame necessary to account for the inflation that we are experiencing. What is it going to take for them to finally get this under control? Welcome to another episode of Counterthought. So I must admit, I did not record this episode after the CPI numbers are released. I know at the day that the CPI numbers are released for July of 2022, that is when this episode is available. So I do not have the latest data, but what I will say and remind you is that the consumer price index through last month, through June of 2022, for June of 2022, year over year, was 9.1%. That was an increase of the previous month, I believe, for May of 2022, which was around 8.4 or 8.6%. The inflation has been at 7 or above since December of last year. So we are now at 7 or above for 8 straight months. In the Biden administration, or during the life of the Biden administration, the consumer price index continues to climb. But the Biden administration does not accept blame for this. The Democratic Party does not accept blame for this, even though they are in power within the legislative and the executive branches of our government. They will, however, accept praise whenever anything good happens, like if gas prices go down for a couple of weeks or something like that. They'll say like, hey, yeah, we did that. But then when gas prices were inflating and got to about $4.75 nationally, no, no responsibility there. It was the Putin price hike. However, Russia, is like only 8% of our oil. And we've since found out that through the strategic oil reserves and the release of some of the oil from that, which is reserved for wartime and, more important things, Biden his administration actually shipped oil over to China, an adversarial country. So the Biden administration continues all that they have done so far is just slow walk the response to inflation. Now, I'm not unreasonable. I know that when the pandemic was easing up, when Biden took office, in January of 2021, that the supply and demand of our country, that the supply chain of our country is not just US only, right? There are numerous countries that feed us goods that we then as Americans consume. So we are not just like a standalone country. Not everything is produced here. So yeah, the other countries and their response varied. Their response to the pandemic varied from our response. So I'll give it to, I'll be forgiving to an extent to the administration that, hey, they couldn't control necessarily every aspect of our supply chain. However, there are things that could have been done in America to improve the supply chain. It was well documented, well publicized that Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation here for the Biden administration, was asleep at the wheel, pardon the pun, with our supply chain. There were numerous stories going on for, I think, about a couple of weeks, maybe even a month earlier this year, talking about how the goods were not able to be brought off of the cargo ships that were coming into the California ports in Southern California. You may have remember seeing images of hundreds of boats just being, well, not docked, but dropping anchor and just chilling out there in the Pacific Ocean, waiting to be able to come in and drop off their containers. But it was said that there's only one, I think, port within LA and maybe one nationwide that was operating 24 hours, that it wasn't even operating at full capacity. So there was no way with the workers that we didn't have enough workers to be able to unload all of that cargo, to unload all of those goods. So that blocked up, bottlenecked the supply chain. And then, we suffered for it. Prices shot up. The demand was there, but the supply was not. And why did we not have enough workers? We didn't have enough workers because there were, policies put in place, recommendations put in place from our government that restricted the individuals who could come to work. And then individual states in their response, like in this case in California, had restrictions on who could report to work, whether or not you were vaccinated or not. So we refused to get out of our own way, even though the pandemic should have come and gone by then. And also, not to mention, or don't forget about the bill that was passed into law in March of 2021 that injected trillions of dollars into our economy. So now, like, the standard, reason for inflation happening is too much money chasing too few goods. So after injecting about $6 trillion into our economy when we brought it to a halt in 2020 during the end of Trump's presidency, instead of just letting it restart and saying, hey, that's enough money being put into our economy, let's stop there, we decided to go for, or the Biden administration decided to go for another $3 trillion, I believe it was, in March of 2021. And then that got added into the cycle of our economy. And the Biden administration and the Fed and everything else, they said that inflation was transitory. It turns out it's not. Turns out it's not. They talked about, there was going to be just maybe a little blip here and then it'll come down. Janet Yellen now is on record saying that she did not factor in accurately the impact of, the supply chain coming from factoring in from other countries, like their components, their piece of the puzzle for our supply chain. Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair, is on record now saying that he was wrong about inflation. Now that we've been experiencing 8 months of 7+% year over year, starting again in December of 2021. So the experts got it wrong. Our administration has it wrong. The Federal Reserve finally, going back maybe I think 2 months now, started to increase interest rates to make it more expensive, a higher interest rate for banks to borrow money from one another. And we've seen now mortgage rates go up a little bit. At one point, we were sub 3, I believe was the national average at one point. Real estate was skyrocketing, and now you're seeing real estate come down a little bit, and the mortgage rates are going up. Right now, the national average, I checked just before recording this, and it was around national average for about $175,000 mortgage, and the assumption is that your credit score is about 700, is 5.85%, which is like a 0.25% increase from the previous week. But the Biden administration continues to advocate for more spending. They believe in this modern monetary theory that, hey, you can spend however much money you want. It's just digital dollars. It's not going to cause any type of inflation or anything like that. Because the Senate over this past weekend, you may have heard, passed as they call it, the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, talk about politics, right? Calling it the Inflation Reduction Act when what this bill is supposed to do, what they say it is going to do, is generate $768 billion of revenue for our federal government over the next 10 years. Our GDP is between $4 to $6 trillion annually. And you're talking about generating on average about $76 billion. Excuse me? You're talking about thousandths of a percent. It's laughable. And the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan group within our government, says that actually it's this bill is going to have a negligible effect on inflation. But yet they want you to believe that it's going to have a positive effect on inflation, that it's going to bring down the numbers, because that's why they're calling it the Inflation Reduction Act. But yet the CBO nonpartisan said, hey, it's actually going to not do a whole bunch of anything, good or bad. So it seems like it is just a game to either the Democrats that are in power, to this Biden administration, or if you want to go a little further, I guess, to the right, a little further more with a conspiracy, you could say that this is part of their plan to do this great reset across the world, this globalism. And the argument there is the fact that they want this modern monetary theory. They want our economy to get to a place to where the American people are basically having to cave under the thumb, the pressure being put down upon us from inflation and everything else, in order for us to then have to give in to what the government wants us to do. Now, again, that's like way in the conspiracy realm and everything like that. A lot of activity has been happening, and I've even talked about some of these on Instagram lives and things like that. But that is like the conspiracy realm. But the Biden administration wholeheartedly believes in this modern monetary theory. Prominent Democrats believe in this modern monetary theory. Senator Elizabeth Warren believes in this. She was advocating for more spending even when the $3 trillion deal last year was passed, saying like, that's not enough. That's not enough. We need to spend more money. We need to tax people even more. One of the aspects of this Inflation Reduction Act that was passed over this past weekend talks about $80 billion going to the IRS in order to fund estimated 80,000 new IRS agents. Now, it is said that these IRS agents are going to be targeting these large companies who are not paying their, quote, fair share. But I've heard a counter argument to say, well, all these corporations are going to have the resources necessary to have these tax attorneys and everything else, and the accountants and everybody that would be involved in fighting like an audit. And it's not actually going to be these big corporations that these new IRS agents are going to. These same IRS agents that will then outnumber the number of Marines we have in our military, the number of employees of the FBI and I believe the DOJ combined. That what in turn is going to happen is that these new agents are then going to be seeking us, we the people, the lower middle class, upper middle class, us, those of us who are not making above $400,000. The same people that they've promised, will not experience any new taxes if you make under $400,000. But inflation's a tax. They never talk about that though. No. They never talk about inflation being a tax. Inflation is a tax on everyone. Part of that blame game that the Democrats are continue to say, and the Biden administration continue to say, is that there is price gouging, deliberate price gouging at the pump. Looking at the numbers and the profit margins and everything else for these oil companies and gas companies and the like. Same with shipping companies and so on and so forth. And there could be a little bit of that going on, but it's not the full reason of why we've been dealing with plus 7% inflation since December of 2021. If you look at this chart and table here that I'm going to show you here on the screen, you can see it. It's clear as day. This first one, the table, January of 2021, when Biden came into office, 1.4%, this far left column. This is the overall inflation year over year. So from January 2020 to January 2021, we're at 1.4%. February 2021, 1.7. March, 2.6. Then in April 2021, after that bill was passed in March, again, like the $3 trillion, the Save America plan, 4.2%. May 2021, that's when we hit 5. Then we stayed 5 or above all the way until September of 2021. October 2021, we jumped to 6. December 2021, we jumped to 7, and we have been above 7% for 8 straight months and above 8 for 4 straight months. And I believe we're going to be above 8 again because I recorded this before the latest numbers were released on Wednesday. I believe we're going to be above 8 again for July 2022. And then if you look at this chart, this is over the last 20 years. This is showing the overall inflation. I mean, you can see going over the last 20 years to June of 2022, we were at just 1.1%. We peaked in June of 2000 or August 2008, July of 2008, sorry, with the housing market crash and that recession. That's what the gray shaded area is. It indicates a recession by the Bureau of Economic Research. We're at 5.6% there. So even in that Great Recession, even in the recession of 2008, we only hit 5.6% inflation. However, come over here to the right-hand side and you can see, and I just detailed it going through that table, last month for June of 2022, we're at 9.1% inflation. And we are in a recession, depending on how you define it, right? Depending on how you define it. But if you take the standard definition of recession, 2 quarters of negative GDP, we are there. So not only are we experiencing record high inflation, highest inflation seen in the last 40 years, we are also now in a recession. And the Biden administration cannot get a handle on this. They cannot get a handle in their messaging. They cannot get a handle in their policies. And I argue that they are purposefully doing this. Because again, they subscribe to this modern monetary theory where you can never have too much money. But as we are seeing, as we spend more money, as we print more money, as we create more money, whatever you want to call it, as we are injecting trillions of dollars into our economy, we are suffering more and more inflation. And yeah, like I said at the beginning, sure, there are certain elements of it that factor in, such as supply and demand in the supply chain and so on and so forth. But we are a good year to year and a half out of this pandemic. We didn't need the $3 trillion. There are billions upon billions, I believe even trillions of dollars that have not been used from the $6 trillion that was passed in 2020. We did not need the extra 3 that was passed in March of 2021. And we surely don't need this infrastructure plan, which is passed purely for political purposes, which is another 768 raised. However, we are paying and doling out money for those new IRS agents. We're going to be doling out money for incentives and everything for the green initiatives and so on and so forth. All of these subsidies that are going to be handed out. We do not need more money put into our economy. What we need to stop spending. We do need to bring things back to the US to be manufactured here. So we do not need to rely on other countries who could be handling a response to a pandemic or could have something else going on inside their country that we don't have any true direct control over, which, could then impact our supply chain. I think I've talked about that before. We need to produce as much as possible here in the United States. And if that inflates the cost a little bit or increases the cost from what we're used to, then I guess for security reasons and other things, we need to still produce those products here in this country, or at least make sure if we are relying upon other countries, do our best to make sure that those are with allies of ours and not adversaries. I mean, did you ever see the list of how many products, medicines, everything else that we rely on from China? China under President Xi, struggled there, is not our friend. Under Putin in Russia, they are not our friend. we relied about on 8% of our oil coming from Russia. China, we rely on billions upon billion dollars annually for goods coming from China. And a lot of that comes from capitalism and so on and so forth. But we need to bring as many things back here. That's what I believe, to be produced here, to be manufactured here, to be grown here as we can. That is something that we can do for our own security, not only national security, but also fiscal security. But this Biden administration, again, refuses to truly accept blame for the part that they have played in the inflation that we are dealing with. Inflation is a tax on all of us. 9%, they want to tout wage growth and how unemployment is low. Well, unemployment is low because less people are in the labor market. They want to tout the job growth. Well, these jobs are still replacing the ones that existed prior to the pandemic. And they want to talk about wages growing. Well, the average wage growth is not 9% like it is for our inflation. So let's say you got your typical, let's say at your job, you get a 2% raise for inflation, and let's say you got a performance bonus of like another 2%. So you get a 4% raise from last year to this year. Well, as I've said, we've been above 7% inflation since December 2021. Going back, we've been above 6 since about September or October of 2021. So even though you got that raise, you're not seeing any true additional dollars added to your bank account, to your paycheck, because we are experiencing inflation above what you got as your raise, your 4%. So don't believe the lie of wage growth. Your wages, unless they're above current inflation, you're not earning any more money than you did the previous year or the year before that. So this Biden administration, they refuse to take blame. They want to spend, spend, spend. If a number comes down in this inflation calculation, then they take credit for that. But then once it spins back up and increases, then it's someone else's fault. I talked about this in a previous episode. This Biden administration and Biden himself refused to take blame for all these things that are going on in our country, all the negative things. And you can say, yeah, that's politics. But I believe that they truly believe that it's not their fault. They truly believe it's not their fault. And then you add into that politics and add that into the mix, then they are going to truly believe that it's not their fault, because they cannot risk admitting fault for fear that they're going to lose their own supporters, members of their political base. So as we are experiencing another month of high inflation, again, we've been above 7 since December, above 6 since September, above 5, I believe it was, since May of last year, 2021. We are continuing as the American people. We are the ones who are suffering the most. And we will continue to suffer as long as the Biden administration and the Democrats in Congress continue to want to spend more and more money. They don't believe this, but it is shown to be true. Inflation, that you continue to inject more money into the economy, inflation is going to stay high. If I had to guess, if I had to look into my crystal ball, looking into the next year, let's say year and a half, going through the end of Biden's first term, the next 2 years, I guess, 1 year to 2 years, our fiscal policy for the United States is either going to stay right around where it is, or it's going to get worse. It's going to stay right where it is, or it's going to get worse. Now, one thing that we can do, right, as conservatives, as maybe independents, libertarians, independent leaning to the right, libertarian leaning to the right, conservatives, just Republican, wherever you fall. One thing we can do is win back the House, give the Republicans the majority in the House, do not vote third party, win the majority in the House to at least stymie the efforts of the Democrats and the Biden administration for the last half, the second half of his presidency. Otherwise, again, I think that we're just going to either stay where we are or it's going to continue to get worse. And we don't want it to continue to get worse. Because regardless of what may happen, the administration is not going to accept responsibility. So what we can do to put a stop to this, or to put a pause, to put a cork into the hole, or the holes that are cracking in the dam, is to win back the House. If we can also win the Senate, make Biden a lame duck president so that the fiscal policy of this country cannot continue to worsen. We have been dealing with this inflation again for over a year now. We've been above 4% for more than a year. And inflation is a tax on everyone. So regardless of how much money you have or how little you have, all of us are affected by this inflation now and continuing into the future. Hi, I'm Brian Kletter, the creator and host of the Counterthought Podcast. Thank you for watching this video. Remember to like it, and then also check out these 2 videos and subscribe to the channel. For more daily content from me, you can find me on Instagram at CounterThoughtCEO and the official Counterthought Instagram page at counter_thought. Thank you for watching, and spread the word.